Australia has a new kind of Ministry of Man Control. I kid you not, this is not something out of a dystopian George Orwell novel. It's actually real. I can't even believe I'm reporting this, but it's true. This country has lost its freaking mind. The Premier of Victoria, Jacinta Allen, has announced a new parliamentary role in the Victorian government to change men's behaviour. She has appointed Tim Richardson, MP, the member for Mordialloc, as the inaugural Parliamentary Secretary for Men's Behaviour Change. Let me just hit you with that one more time. The Parliamentary Secretary, this is what it's called, for Men's Behaviour Change. To that, I can only say it's time for government to F right off. In announcing the role, Allen said it's, quote, the first position of its kind to exist in Australia. Yeah, that's right. Because we used to be a free country that believed in small government and that government has absolutely no place, quote, managing people's behaviour. Let's hope it's the last position of its kind in Australia, because this is an obscenity. And I hope the good men of the great state of Victoria rise up, rally and march against this hideous new bureaucracy. The Premier says it's part of her government's commitment to, quote, make Victoria a safer place for women and children. There's the warning sign, folks. The socialists are keeping us safe again. Whenever they're keeping us safe, if it means taking more power for themselves, we have to be very, very careful. This is how socialists do it, not by force, but through kindness and safety and looking after you and infantilizing us and parenting us. Allen says it's to, quote, stop the tragedy of deaths of Victorian women at the hands of men. My God, this is not the role of government in any liberal democracy. She says this is not easy work, but it's important, and we can't afford not to address it and waste a moment. A couple of weeks ago on the show, we shared the very good news that rates of domestic homicide have actually plummeted in Australia since 1989. Here's a quick recap of that data, actual data and facts from the National Institute of Criminology. This is the rate of homicides in Australia per 100,000 people from 1989 on the left of the chart to 2023 on the right. Back in 1989, you had a 1.8 in 100,000 chance of being murdered in this country. Today, it's less than half that. Half. That's massive, and we should be celebrating it. But what about domestic violence-related homicide? What about intimate partner homicide, the radical feminists will argue? Surely that's gone up. We all know that. I mean, well, actually, no. Homicides are classified into domestic, meaning an intimate partner, a relative, or someone living with you; acquaintance, meaning someone you know not living with you; and a stranger. This chart shows all three types, and the rates from 1989 to 2023 for each type. The dark green line is domestic. The light green line is acquaintance. They have both dropped massively since 1989. The rate of domestic homicide in 2022-23 was 0.3, and the acquaintance homicide rate decreased to 0.24, the lowest since 1989, when it was 2.5 times that. As you can see from the grey line at the bottom, the type of homicide that hasn't dropped is stranger homicide. And the victims of stranger homicide are significantly mostly men. It's probably the gender of the victims. That must be where women victims are on the rise. Oh, no, that's also falling. Most victims of homicide in Australia are still male. In 2023, male victims were 69% of homicides, 171 out of the 232 murders overall. That puts the male victim rate at 1.29 per 100,000, and the female rate is at 0.56, well less than half. And over time, it's just more really good news. Since 1989, the rate of male victimisation halved, and the rate of female homicide victimisation decreased by more than half at 58%. So all this good news is just getting a bit too much. How will we demonise men in Australia now if they're the ones getting murdered more and the murder rates are all dropping? So that was from our episode 311 about a month ago, wearing the same tie, in fact, what do you know? And joining me now to answer that question about how they're going to demonise men now is well-known and long-time men's rights activist Bettina Arndt. Bettina, it is great to have you on the other side. Thanks for joining us.
Lovely to be here, Damian.
So, how are they going to demonise men if this number keeps going down? It seems as though the commentators are detached from actual reality and actual data. So we're being brainwashed in a way or sold a lie.
Oh, the data doesn't matter. I mean, we have the best feminists, the most powerful feminists in the world.
Right.
They've got all our institutions absolutely sewn up, dancing to their tune, and any data that comes out, they totally ignore if it goes against the narrative. I noticed in the last week, 2 women have stabbed their partners. One of them killed him, and the other one's fighting for his life. Have you seen that mentioned in our media? No.
So has the Victorian Premier Jacinda Allen set up a solution to a problem that doesn't exist here, and an abhorrent, horrible solution at that, right?
Yeah, this idea of a minister for changing men's behaviour. Oh, what's a parliamentary secretary, isn't it?
Yeah.
For changing men's behaviour. I mean, what a joke. There is nothing wrong with men's behaviour in Australia. We have a tiny, tiny group of men who have a problem with violence. In fact, our official data shows that less than 1%, it's about 1% of women report physical violence from their partner or ex-partner. 1%. That means 99% of men are not physically violent towards their partner. And yet you never hear that. That statistic is well and truly buried in our ABS data. And no one ever talks about that, of course, because they're so good at promoting this idea that it's a problem across the board, that all men are dangerous, that boys have to be ashamed of being male, and so as it goes on.
Is there anything like this anywhere else in the world, as far as you know, like one of these sort of parliamentary secretaries or, organised bureaucracies to change men's behaviour?
No, I actually checked out that last night because it's a big organisation, an international organisation, bringing together about 130 groups internationally, looking at trying to change the dialogue around domestic violence. And they said, never heard of anything like this before. I was actually on a podcast with some Americans yesterday, and I said, don't worry about the spiders and the poisonous snakes. Our feminists are the ones you have to worry about in Australia. They're the ones who are really dangerous. Yeah.
It is truly frightening. I mean, to think that North Korea, Iran, I mean, these places would never think of doing this, and yet in Australia we've got this thing that I've reported on a lot of crazy stuff on this show for the last couple of years, but this has really floored me. Just how incredibly
appalling. But of
frightening.
course, it's a part of a very carefully constructed narrative where we've got little boys being shamed in schools, being told they need, to do something about their toxic masculinity. And on it goes right throughout our workplaces, everywhere, this constant demonisation of men.
So it doesn't seem like we can appease this much longer, Bettina. Men have been very passive in sort of, fighting this or speaking out. We don't want to be accused of being sexist, so we've sort of behaved ourselves up until now. But are we at a point now, do you think, where men in Australia need to actually get mobilised and organised? And, I was talking about maybe we need to see the Victorian men rallying in the streets and marching. I'm not kidding when I say that. I mean, I think we need to do something, right?
Yeah, no, because I understand how difficult it is. I have people contact me every day saying, it's all very well for you, an old granny. I mean, I can get away with it. But men lose their jobs, and they seriously do. I mean, I've talked to people doing psychology, people doing law, whatever it is. If they speak out and tell the truth about issues like domestic violence, they won't pass their courses. They'll lose their jobs. They won't get promotions. That's the reality in Australia.
Well, they don't get the jobs in the first place. I mean, we are in a seriously bad way. We can no longer really call ourselves a free country in that sense. But I mean, men are just going to have to braven up, aren't we? We're going to have to be a little bit more courageous and stop being, weak cowards, terrified of standing up to bully feminists, because that's what these people are, bully feminists.
Oh, they are. But I mean, I think also some of the solution is involving more women. And I mean, I started this group a few years ago called Mothers of Sons to bring together mothers whose sons have been done over
and falsely accused.
In our justice system. And it was very funny, actually, because we brought together all these women with terrible stories whose their whole life savings has gone to trying to defend their sons against false allegations. And we had it all ready and blah, 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 presented it to the media. They totally ignored it. But you believe all women except mothers of sons.
Yes, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Believe all women, just not these ones. Yeah, and Mothers of Sons is online if anybody wants to look up Mothers of Sons. You've also got a conference coming up, haven't you? Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, terribly exciting. And it's a really pivotal moment in Australia because I think some of the cracks are emerging in the edifice that has been carefully constructed around, particularly in our justice system. We've had 5 judges in the last 6 months speaking out about cases going to court, rape cases going to court supported by insufficient evidence. So they're just pushing everything. Any accusation a woman makes can end up in court now. And these judges were absolutely calling this out. And it's led to an audit of all current sexual assault cases in New South Wales.
Good.
And of course, we had the Soften Up inquiry. I mean, there's so many things happening. We thought this is a good time to have a conference about restoring the presumption of innocence, which of course is the essence of, this is the big issue that's being undermined in Australia. We don't have equality before the law. We have a justice system based on believe all women, and men are not getting a fair go. We need to talk about this. And I've got a fantastic group of speakers lined up, brave people who are absolutely going to blow the whistle on what's happening in our justice system.
Well, I found that if I talk about online, if I ever talk about the presumption of innocence, you immediately get accused of being a rape apologist. It's an obscene leap. I find that highly offensive, as a dad of girls, and it's just offensive to me that anybody would call me a rape apologist just because I say, well, hang on a minute, you actually need evidence to charge people with crimes, and we need to maintain our presumption of innocence as a fundamental principle of law in Australia.
Join the club, Damian. I thought that was my exclusive club with the rape apologist.
Yeah, it really is just pathetic.
It is very hard to speak out, as you're discovering, in this territory.
You even had to change the date of the conference or change the venue because you were attacked by a mob of crazy activists online?
We had a group who was there's a petition online to close us down, and they appealed to the Wallara Council, which is this is the eastern suburbs where we're having the conference. And Allegra Spender, our local member, to close down our conference. I can imagine her with her broomstick battering the door of the conference. Anyway,
sorry, Allegra Spender, the MP, the local MP, the Teal, she closed it down.
They appealed to her. They said she should take action against this conference. We haven't seen her on her broomstick yet, but you never know.
And you've had to move the conference date or
we moved
venue?
The conference date. I mean, we originally had Bruce Lehrmann speaking, and of course that got very controversial very quickly, particularly in terms of the extraordinary judgment by Michael Lee.
Somebody closed down the tour of Donald Trump Jr. last year, and I note also that our police forces have been acting rather unethically because they've been demanding money from conference organisers to provide the security that they should be providing for free under the taxpayer funding that the police force gets. And they've been have you had any demands for money from the New South Wales Police?
Not yet. And we really need lots of people in Sydney to come along, which is because it's going to be a really historic event.
Okay, August 31 in Sydney.
31.
And get tickets online whereabouts?
If they Google my website, find my website, and there's a pop up there with a link to it all. So that's
okay. Bettina Arndt, 2 T's and an ARNDT.
That's right.
Google that and you'll find it.
That.
All right, Bettina, thanks so much for joining us. We'll have you back on the show in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Take care. Bye now. Let's make sure those awful conspiracy theories about social media suppressing conservative and centre-right content is ended forever. Just hit the subscribe button down here and the subscribe button there if you like, if you prefer that one. And the little bell. The little bell's very important because that'll notify you when our content comes out. You can watch full episodes of The Other Side right here. Have a look at pressing that button too. I mean, there are so many buttons to subscribe. Just subscribe. We're keeping you up to date. The Other Side, all the news summary of the week without the woke.